Greetings, Neilist here. This is a video for Olm on one of the species of the world. So today I'm going to talk about elves. And so, the big kind of defining thing about elves is how their DNA works in the verse of Olm. So with humans, you get all of your kind of stuff from your parents. You know, what you are is greatly reflected by the parents you came from. With having, some changes based on environment, people get paler as they go north or south, and they get, darker as they go towards the equator, things like that. Generally, not always, of course. With elves, their DNA is going to be is much more influenced by their environment. So, say humans move into an area, they'll basically stay the same. Some traits will come in or go out as needed for the environment, but mostly they're still just humans. Where with elves, if they go from one locale to a different one, different environments, they will change drastically within a couple generations to suit the environment around them. As an example, you have the Alfar, or the High Elves, and as they go deeper into the forests, there's actually two blends that happen there. You have the Wood Elves, which take to the canopies, and they evolve kind of bark hues, green hues of skin. Their hair turns green to match the vines and leaves around them. They become disguised with the canopy, and their bodies develop over a couple generations to be much more capable in the trees. And so then you have the other ones that went to the forest floor, and this is actually the breed of elf that Pat's character Ereve is. These are the moon elves. They stuck to the forest floors, caverns near the surface around the forests and whatnot, and they became pale, kind of blue hues to their skin. Their hair grew dark, and they adapted for more night-like environments, since where they lived is generally darker than their canopy-dwelling brethren. And once the elves have gone that far into the different type of elf, they're not nearly as compatible with like the elves that even are one step away from them. So like the high elves to the wood elves, the fertility between the two is not nearly as strong as a high elf with a high elf or a wood elf with a wood elf. For a high elf and a wood elf to actually reproduce is really unlikely. It can happen, but very, very unlikely, since their DNA has changed drastically just because of the environment that they moved into. And so because of this, you also have like the desert elves, who have grown a bit huskier to hold more water and to kind of keep it in. They hold more nutrients for longer periods of time. They don't have to eat as often. Their skin has grown to the hues of the sand to kind of reflect the sun more, so they don't bake, and then to kind of blend in with their environments better. It's kind of a theme of the elves, is where they are, they generally will shift towards becoming more like their environment. They're kind of Fae-like in that aspect. I'll have another video on how the Fae work. And then you have the mountain elves, who grow taller and stronger, enough to rival things like the orcs and the dwarves and whatever mountain-dwelling creatures you can think of. And their skin becomes dark, like the stone around them, very dark gray. Same with their hair. Their hair goes from like dark gray to black. And they become kind of cold in their personalities. They're generally nice, but they can definitely feel distant. You know, they're welcoming, but it feels weird because of how rigid they can be. What other ones are there? There's the Trow, which I'm taking from traditional Norwegian folklore. These elves have gone deep underground. They actually are elves. There's two groups that went north or south from kind of the central part of the world, north and south. And a couple groups were found by the goddess of cold and winter, things like that. And they were transformed into the Vin. And the Vin are snow elves, ice elves, whatever you want to call them. They're tall, very skinny, like spiders made out of icicles kind of thing. Very proficient with magic. Very isolated too, and their society kind of shifts between a very balanced, peace-loving, very chill, content to stick to their own society, and then the other half of their culture is being very warlike and trying to cover the world in an eternal winter, you know, dawn of a new ice age, depending on which of the two goddesses that they have are in power. Because you have Seer and Ikra. Seer and Ikra. Ikra is the evil one of the two. She wants power. She wants the Vin to take over the world in the Ice Age kind of thing. And while she is not in power, you have Seer, and she's all about balance and peace and being cool with the rest of the world. So their culture changes drastically depending on which goddess has power at the time. So each age will see the Vin as either a feared enemy or as the Ice Elves. They live up in the cold. Whatever. They're there. That will be described in further detail in the books. And then there's the Trow, which go underground. Many people will think of the Drow, of course, because the Drow are based on the Trow of Norwegian folklore. But the Trow in Olm are much more troglodyte-like creatures. You know, they are mostly blind. They have kind of translucent skin. So like if they were in bright light, you'd be able to see their skeleton through their flesh. Generally creepy people. They're not super overly hostile towards the surface dwellers. There are definitely a lot of wars between the two, based mostly on cultural misunderstandings. But then there's the Trow that dig even deeper into the ground. And so they are much more troglodytish. They are completely blind. They can sense light, and they basically will attack any creature that has a source of light. So if you go down there with like a lantern or a candle, they will try to kill you because they don't like the light. Which is fairly counterintuitive since they can't actually see it. Nobody actually knows why they hate the light. So, I'll tell you a little secret. It's because of the god that they found down in the dark. Down there they found a god of darkness and hatred, chaos, and generally considered evil things. This god has corrupted them. The magics of the Numerim, which the Numerim is the name for those deep, deep, dark places. Down in the Numerim, they have been corrupted by these weird environmental magics. And of course, they found that ancient, slumbering god. And that caused a big ol' war between the two different factions of the Trow. The ones that went a bit too deep, and the ones that are a bit closer to the surface. Eventually, well, I'll have details of that war later. It's a big one. And there's one last ones I forgot to mention were the Wild Elves. They're the ones that, it's a few groups of them around the world that decided civilized life of the Alfar was not something they wanted. So they left for more wild places. Lots of plains, hilly type areas, the borders of mountains, badlands. They're the more barbaric tending of the elves. Later in history, the various elves travel a lot because travel becomes easier, and so you'd be able to go into a big city and you'd see any type of elf. The Alfar are the most common. Next would be the Wood Elves. That's my little ditty on elves. Oh, and then much later in time, once the nations of Olm become spacefaring, you get the Void Elves. Now these guys, when mass populations had the capability of venturing into space, a large group of elves decided to go into space and to not come back. They started making space stations and large colonial ships in space, and they stayed in space. Occasionally they would make, these like mega structures on huge asteroids and things like that. But they, spend generations living in next to no gravity or artificial gravity. And so they change a bit. Their skin blackens to accommodate for the constant bombardment of space rays, cosmic rays from various sources. They become thin, long, creepy looking. If you were in a dark ship and they came out of the shadows, it might look like a four-limbed spider. And they become very distant from the people of Olm, even more so than the Vin. They develop a very odd culture, but when it comes to spacefaring technology, nothing beats them. If you're on a ship and you can get it upgraded or, get some Void Elf technology, you're going to have the top-of-the-line stuff. And nobody really fucks with the Void Elves once they are established. And they reach the farthest, the quickest of any of the races, that's for sure. So I believe that is all on elves for now.
Yep.